Thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab's free online webinar. You are currently participating in Year-End Brand Review, Prepare Your Nonprofit for 2022. Questions are encouraged throughout the webinar. You may type them into the questions box as they arise, and they will be read by me, your moderator. Today's presenter is Lidia. I'll now hand it over to you, Lidia.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to kick off 2022 and help everybody with their preparing their organization, doing a brand review, and getting things in gear for the new year. So I am Lidia Varesco Racoma of Lidia Varesco Design in Chicago. I am a brand strategist and marketing designer. I've been in business for a little over 20 years, 21 years as of last year. And my passion really lies in branding and as well as creative marketing. So today, as I mentioned, we will be talking about doing a brand review. You'll get some tips whether you have done one before or if you've never done one. This will be a nice way to get acquainted. So let's get started. Okay, so today's agenda, first we'll talk about why a brand review is important, and then we'll talk about how to conduct a brand review. And then next, we will talk about putting your brand review to work. So actually taking those results and using those results in your work, in your strategy. And then next, we'll take some questions. And of course, feel free to put your questions in the chat box along the way. And I can stop, if there's something that's relevant to what I'm speaking about, I'm happy to stop and chat about it, or we can talk about it at the end. And then I will also share with you some resources to help you along with your brand reviews. So first, I'd like to pause and take a poll. I'd like to know of our attendees here, when is the last time your organization had a brand review? So was that last year, 2021? Was that maybe 2 or more years ago, or never? Has your organization never implemented a brand review? And there should be a poll that's popped up on the screen. I'll give you about maybe 30 seconds to answer that question. And by a brand review, I mean, really formally or informally. So it could be that, you have sort of a system to do this and you've implemented that, or maybe you just, kind of take a look at everything. There's several different ways you can do a brand review. So, it doesn't have to be formal, even an informal. I'm just curious to see. Okay, great. So it looks like our results are skewing in the never. Okay, great. Well, you're in the right place. This is perfect. You're definitely going to get some great tips here today. And I hope that means that the next time we speak, everybody will have a more recent brand review. So first, let's talk about why a brand review is important for your nonprofit organization. So there's 3 different reasons why I think it's really important. The first one is performance, so your brand's performance. The second one is to give you an insight into improvements that can be made. And then the last one is relating to goals. And goals are really what's driving this, because we want to make sure that we are following our goals, we're aligning with all of our goals within our organization, and that includes in our branding as well. So as far as the brand's performance, by doing a review, you can see how your brand performed overall. So you can really get that big picture of, what's going on in your brand. You can see how your audience is engaging or connecting with your brand, which is really important, because if you're putting things out there and people are not connecting with it or engaging with you, then really, what's the point, right? So we really want to make sure that it's working, that things are working, which leads us to the next point, which is improvements. So by doing this review, one of the main things that comes out of it is that you can see what's working and what's not working. And you can start to see if there are gaps in your branding. And if there are, how can you fill them? And as well as what improvements you can make. And this is really important, I think, to do. This is why I recommend doing a brand review, at least on a yearly basis, because things change, right? And especially now, in this ever-changing environment, your organization, the way that you implement your mission, your programming, everything is changing almost on a monthly basis. So it's really important that things that are changing, that is reflecting in your branding. So that's this column, this middle column, I really feel is like the most important aspect of the review, to really see how you can make improvements or changes, and if there's something missing. And then the last one is your goals. And are you meeting your branding goals? And first of all, I should back up. Do you have branding goals? And that's something that we won't really go into that in this webinar, but perhaps in a future webinar, because I think that's really important to think about when you are creating your organizational goals. And then of course you have your marketing strategy. How do those branding goals fit in? And then how can you adjust them? So the review will show you, okay, maybe we're not quite meeting this goal. How can we adjust it? What do we want to change in our strategy? And then lastly, the review can help you actually create those goals, as well as the KPIs to go along with it. So I think that this session will be really great for those of you, the large percentage of you that did answer that you've never done a brand review, because this can be a really great place to start, and then to start creating those goals and the tracking to go along with it. So now we'll talk a little bit about how to conduct a brand review. So when you're conducting your brand review, you want to really look at everything. You want to look at all of those brand touch points that are related, not just sort of the obvious ones. So when I do my branding workshops, I think people, when they think of branding, they really think of like, oh, my logo, my website. There's really so much more to it. It's really all about how you are presenting your organization, how people are perceiving it, how they're connecting with you. So you really want to look at all of the aspects, all of the touch points is what they're called. So starting with, of course, the obvious that we think about, which would be your website. And then you also want to look at your other marketing materials. So, most of you, I'm sure, have your annual report, your impact report. You've got your fiscal year-end appeals, your year-end appeals. So there's a lot of different places you can look at your branding and your marketing. And then social media is a big one. I'm sure everybody here is on social media in some capacity. So then we want to start to look at those digital brand touch points. So your social media outlets, the different channels that you're on, your blog, your content marketing. That's one that I did not include in here, but that's really important. So if you're doing a blog, if you're doing any other sort of maybe podcasts or webinars, that's really important to look at as well. And then there's what I like to call the more environmental. So then you want to look at, how you are connecting with clients, with the audience that you serve. How do you relate to them? What is your work environment like? What does the actual office or program facility look like? These are all really, really important places where your brand should be present, and it should have, a big presence actually, because that's where people are interacting with you. But a lot of times people don't really think about some of those environments. So, and then lastly, events. That's something we also want to look at. How is your brand presented in that capacity? So the first step of the brand review, and this is, like I said, you can do something kind of simple on your own. You can do something, much more advanced. So we'll kind of start with simple, going into a little bit more advanced, and then I will also have a worksheet for you that you can use if you are doing a brand review on your own. And of course, I'm always here to help too with questions. So the first step is to gather all of your materials relating to those brand touch points that we talked about. So the print, the digital, the environmental. So in the print, we talked about some of these already, but you'll look at your business cards and stationery, if you have those, any marketing brochures, annual reports, impact reports, flyers, event invitations, any sort of print or digital advertising. You want to, basically, those are easy. You can just pull those out of your cabinet. And then you also want to start looking at the digital touch points. So that's your website, your various social media profiles. And with social media, you want to look at everything. So you want to look at, the visual, of course, but you also want to look at maybe a couple recent posts. You want to look at your profile info. What did you fill in for like the About Us or our mission? Your email newsletters. Look at a couple of previous issues of your emails. Any digital ads that you do. Your donation page is a big one. Take a look at that one. Your blog or any other content marketing that you do. So if you do case studies or reports, these are all really important things to look at when you are doing the brand review. And then lastly is the environmental. So this is where you look at, if you have that elevator pitch or talking points about your organization, your environment, like I mentioned, like how does your office actually look? What do people experience when they come into your office? Is there any sort of signage or other, elements, visual elements related to your brand in the office, as well as events? I have in-person events here, but we'll talk about in-person and virtual events that you want to take a look at for the brand review. So, this really does seem like a lot, and it is, but what I suggest to do is to, either gather samples, like all of those print materials are easy to just pull samples, and then take screenshots. So like for your website, for your social media, it might take a couple hours, but just go through everything, take screenshots, print them out, and spread it all out on a table. So in my opinion, this is really the easiest and the most effective way to do it, because you really get to see everything at a glance. And this is where, some of those gaps or some of those areas that need improvement will really start to stand out for you, because you do actually get to see everything, in one place. So now that you have everything, you've got everything printed out, spread out on the table. Like I said, this might take a little while and some effort, but it's really worth it. Believe me, in the end, it's totally worth it. So at this point, you want to start analyzing. You want to start looking at things. So like I said, you might see some things might just jump out at you. You might realize like, wow, we're using different colors, on our website than we are in our marketing brochure. Or you might start to notice, oh, we have 5 different versions of our logo. This is something that happens quite often, because sometimes nonprofits will work with maybe a different designer or different marketing agency, and then you end up with all these different variations, and over the years different iterations. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of clients come to me, is that they start to look at everything. They, for some reason, they pull out all the marketing brochures, or they start to look at all their campaigns, and they realize, okay, we've gotten off track here somewhere, and we need to get back on track. So this is a really great way to see if you have gotten off track, and if your branding has become inconsistent, and this is a great way to get back on track. So as you can see here, there are 3 areas that I want you to specifically focus on when you are analyzing your brand's performance, when you're looking at all those samples. The first one is positioning, the second one is messaging, and the last one is visuals. And I do, as I mentioned, I do have a resource that we'll send to you after this session, which is a checklist, which kind of walks you through. You can use, today's session as a reference as well, or the checklist will also kind of walk you through when you are reviewing all of those samples that you've printed out. So the first one is the positioning. And positioning, if you're not familiar, is really how you position your brand, how you are, putting it out into the world. So in positioning, we're talking about the who, what, and why of your brand. So if any of you have attended any of my previous sessions, branding sessions, I talk a lot about who, what, and why. That is really the core of branding. So, the who is your audience, the what is, what your organization is putting out there, how they're making changes, and the why is really that unique sort of, reason that your organization exists. So those three elements really make up the core of your brand's positioning. So as you're doing your brand review, you want to look at your materials in light of the positioning, the who, what, and why. So asking yourself, is our mission and vision communicated clearly? And that's actually another good point to remember is, as you're doing the brand review, you might want to have a copy of your mission and vision handy, because sometimes that also isn't particularly clear as you're working on different materials. So it's good to have that handy as well when you're doing your brand review. And then look at everything, is our mission and vision communicated in our website? Are we getting that point across, in our social media? Because that's something that's really important. That's really, that why that is helping people to connect with you. And that's really kind of the most important part of your brand, in my opinion, that why. That's what makes the connection. So you want to make sure that that's communicated. And then next, are we speaking to our audience? That's the who, and the who, what, and why. That's really important, to know who your audience is and know that you are speaking to that audience. And then lastly, consider what is your point of difference in your organization, and is that apparent? Are you really pointing that out to people that, hey, this is why we're different, this is why, we think you should support us or connect with us, volunteer with us. Those are really important points in that positioning. And then next in your analysis, you want to look at the messaging in your brand. So this is where you start to look at, are we using our brand voice? Do you have a brand voice? If you haven't really thought about it, this is a good time to think about it. What is our voice? How do we come across to people, to our audience? Are we coming across in the way that we want to and that aligns with our mission? And then are we sharing our unique story? Are we expressing our why? This is that why that we talked about in the who, what, and why. That's super important, and that's really where people connect with you. Is that expressed in your branding? When you look at, say your social media, that's a great place to express your why. Is that clear? Can people really pick up on that? And are they engaging with it? And then next, are there clear calls to action? And this is something that, is a little more straightforward, maybe like in an email. Most emails, I'm sure you have a call to action. But in your other materials, on your website, do you have calls to action? In your marketing materials, is there, one really clear call to action for your audience? And then lastly, are you using the channels your audience uses? And this again is, you might have to go a little bit deeper and think about which channels are they using? Are we on those channels? Are we speaking to them? And then lastly is the visuals. So this is, I think, what people mostly think about when they think about branding. They think about the visuals. And that is a really crucial part, because that's really what people notice kind of right off the bat, right? They're going to notice the images that you have on your website, or the colors that you're using, or maybe the logo will, stick with them in their mind. So the visuals are really important in that sense, because that is something that people can pick up on right away. And that's what can also make your brand really memorable to people. So, number one, I think, is logo usage. Is that consistent? And that's probably the top thing I hear from clients is like, oh my gosh, we have so many different versions of our logo, and we're using all these different versions and we don't know which is which. So this is a great point to stop and think, do we have a brand guide? If you do have a brand guide, this is a great time to make sure you're using it. If you don't have a brand guide, that's something that you definitely want to think about. That's another topic that I also speak on, because I'm really, really passionate about people having and using a brand guide. And then you want to make sure you're using those brand colors. So that's another way that nonprofits can kind of get out of that brand consistency, is that the palette is not really clear, and there's different colors being used on the website than there is in social media, and it becomes very disjointed. So that's something to really look at and make sure you have that established and you're using it consistently. And then fonts. Fonts are a really big thing now with so much of marketing and branding being digital. You really want to make sure that you have those brand fonts established in both print and digital. You know, I know a lot of my clients, a lot of nonprofits are using Canva. And so you want to make sure that you're not using, 10 different fonts in your materials. You're sticking with those brand fonts, maybe throwing in a couple of, fonts for fun if you're doing something, a little more fun and unique. But really making sure that that's staying consistent as well within your brand guidelines. And then lastly is imagery. That's something that's really important. If you're using photography, if you're using, your own photography that you're taking or stock photography, is it reflecting your brand? Is it reflecting your mission and accurately showing people, what you do? That's really super important, especially nowadays. And then just to get a little more advanced, you want to start looking at some of your organization's digital analytics. So this is where you want to look at, like, are we engaging with our audience? What type of content is resonating with them? What channels are creating the most engagement? Where are they really connecting with us? And how are they connecting with us? And this is where it all kind of comes full circle. And you can see, okay, are they connecting with our mission and what we're putting out there? And where is that happening? And how is that happening? And you can kind of take it to the next level. So this is really, like I mentioned, going a little bit deeper into the brand review, but really good information to have, if you have the time and the capacity to go a little bit deeper. So now we'll spend the rest of our time, we still have a little bit of time here. We'll talk about actually putting the brand review to work. So how can you actually use the data that you've created, that you've gathered, and how can you actually use that and make it useful? So there's 3 different areas that I like to look at as far as using that brand review data and insight. So the first one is your branding goals. And we touched on this a little bit, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more here. And then the next one is tracking and measurement, which is of course relating to the goals. And then the last one is strategy. So as far as the branding goals, the brand review is a great place to develop and establish those branding goals. So if you haven't really thought about it or created branding goals in your nonprofit, this is a great place to start doing it, right? Once you kind of assess everything, you can see, okay, these are the goals that we really want to put into place. If you have some branding goals, the review can maybe help you rethink them. So you might say, well, okay, we've been looking at this, but maybe it's a little more important that we start keeping closer eye on our, Facebook engagement, because that's where people are connecting with us, and that's where, our stories are resonating the most. So then you can kind of, just sort of tweak those goals and make them a little bit more specific. And then you can also start to review the current channels that you're using as related to your goals. So a lot of you, I'm sure, are using probably all of the various channels. I know that most nonprofits are using print for their appeals. You're using social media, you're using email, maybe some of you are also, doing other things like podcasts and webinars. But this is a great place to start looking at some of those channels and seeing how it relates to your goals. So if you are doing something relating to your brand that really you're not connecting with people, well, maybe we want to rethink that. Or if you tried something new, maybe someone from your organization appeared on a podcast and that was really successful, people really enjoyed it. Well, maybe that's a new goal we want to add, is that expressing our brand more on podcasts. So this is a great place to start. And then next is the tracking and measurement. So this is where you want to look at, how are we currently tracking our goals? What analytics are we looking at? I'm sure that most of you are probably using the typical analytics, that are built into a lot of these channels. Some of you may be using some apps that generate those reports, but this is a good place to consider, how are we doing it now? How are we tracking goals and analytics now? And are there other apps or technology that we can use Or do we maybe just need to, have a team member that can help out with that, or maybe outsource a team member to help out with that? And then lastly, you want to look at the brand review as a whole and start to use those results to inform your branding and marketing strategy. So you want to go back, and I think this is why it's good to have a yearly brand review and maybe coincide that with when you are revamping your marketing plan, your marketing strategy, because you can really use those kind of hand in hand, and you can include your branding goals with your other marketing goals. I think that's kind of a good way to use it. So that's a good place to, take a look at what came out of the brand review, pull out your marketing strategy, see if maybe you want to tweak something, change something, add something new. Like I mentioned, maybe you decide, okay, we're going to do more podcasting this year, or maybe we're going to take away a social channel that hasn't really been performing for us. And then lastly, you want to create a process and a schedule for doing those regular brand reviews so that you can stay on track. So real quick, we'll do one more poll. I know we've got a little bit more time here, but I'm curious to see, does your organization currently measure the effectiveness of your branding? And we'll do this really quickly because I know I've got a couple more slides to get through. And again, feel free to put any questions in the chat. Okay, great. So we've got our results, and as I suspected, majority are not. And I'm hoping that this session today is going to help inspire you to start tracking, because I think, people think of branding as just this kind of visual sort of thing. And I think it really incorporating it into your overall strategy really does help. It helps to make it more effective. So let's go back here. And so real quick, we'll talk about the key takeaways from today. So the first one is a brand review can really help you see how your brand is performing. That's really the key. We want to know, are we connecting with our audience? Is what we're saying really resonating? Are they, are we giving them a reason to come back to us, to attend an event, to donate, to volunteer? And then the second one is the brand review can really give you insight into making those improvements, finding those gaps. What can we do differently? What can we stop doing? What can we start doing? What can we try? That's really, really important so that you're not stuck in the same place. And then lastly, the brand review will really help you to start creating and meeting those branding goals. So I know that that's something that a lot of your organizations maybe haven't done. I'm hoping that it's something that you'll consider and include that to be part of your strategy, your overall marketing strategy, is to really look at your brand and how it's performing and how you can make improvements. So lastly, I have a stat. I really love to include stats and research in my presentations. I think it's really important to be data informed. And, quite literally, the stat is showing, marketers who link their metrics to results are 3 times more likely to hit revenue goals. So it really is showing that, there is a value to creating those goals, and most importantly, to be tracking them, to know that, okay, what we're doing is working, or if it's not working, we can make improvements to it. And I think that really helps organizations to meet all of their goals. And again, I really think there's a lot of importance to aligning all of your goals, to really sitting down and looking at those organizational goals, your strategic plan, your marketing plan, and then some of these branding goals that you might develop, and looking at them together as a whole and making sure they're aligned. So lastly, I just want to say thank you. I'm really, really glad to have this opportunity. I hope that many of you will do a brand review this year and get something useful out of it. As I mentioned, I will be sending you a link to download this branding checklist, which just is kind of an overview of what we talked about today and sort of walks you through the process. Again, as I mentioned, I am always here to help. I have a complimentary 30-minute brand chat that I would like to offer everybody. We can talk about, if there's a specific brand challenge you have, if you wanted to talk a little more in depth about the brand review, you can feel free to sign up for that. And then I do have a couple of upcoming talks on similar topics. I'm going to be speaking at the NT and NTC about creating a nonprofit content calendar. And then I'll be speaking at the ASAE MMNC conference about what's branding got to do with content. So if you do content marketing, that might be an interesting one. And then I have another one that's just been added, which is February 3rd for ACN, which is the Association of Consultants to Nonprofits. And I will be speaking along with a colleague, Gregory Perrine, on mastering virtual communications. We'll be talking about Slack, using Slack and Teams. So I hope that everybody found this useful. I hope to hear from some of you. And thank you again for your time today. And put any questions in the chat, please.
I think we have time for at least one question really quickly. So a question that we got was, how often should we do a brand review? Should it be as often as we review our strategic plan?
Well, I would say for a brand review, I think yearly is a good goal, because I think any more often than that might start to feel a little bit overwhelming. I know that most people don't do their strategic plan yearly. However, I wouldn't necessarily wait on your brand review. I know a lot of organizations might wait like 3 years for the strategic, to take a look at the strategic plan. I would say the brand review should be a yearly effort, just because, like I said, especially nowadays, there's so much that's changing, especially, with events, with the way that nonprofits are implementing their programming. So I think that it's good to take a look at it yearly. If you can't seem to manage it yearly, every other year, I think would be ideal as well.
Great, thank you. And we also had some additional questions, but we don't have time for them today. Where can the attendees reach you if they want to ask you a question?
Yes, they can reach me at lydia@lsvdesign.com. And I will keep this slide up so that you can see my email address is right there on the left column. Also, feel free to sign up if anyone wants to sign up for free 30-minute chat. If there's a question that they wanted to, go into more depth, I'm happy to do that as well. I'm sorry I went a little bit over and we didn't have time for those questions, but I'm happy to talk about them at another time.
You are completely fine. Truly no need to apologize. Thank you, Lydia. This workshop has come to a close. All materials and recordings will be available on our website. Thank you so much for participating in year-end brand review, Prepare Your Nonprofit for 2022. And again, thank you so much, Lydia, for educating our community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here, and I hope to come back and talk about more brand topics.